All right, welcome to another APIDA Heritage Month interview. Today we have a very special guest who needs no introduction, Mr. Dave Rubio, and we will get with him in just 1 second. But as a reminder, throughout the month of May, we will be talking to some of our staff members who identify with the APIDA culture, just about APIDA Heritage Month, and then also their background and their stories. And so, as I said before, we're lucky enough to be joined by a head coach for women's volleyball, Dave Rubio. And very excited to talk to you today, Dave. So thanks for being here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just start. I mean, you've been around for a while, but let's just start with your story and who you are and what you do here with the university.
Well, I was hired here in 1992. When I was hired, I was 32 years old and spent 5 years at a Division II school at Cal State Bakersfield, and was fortunate enough to be hired by Ced Dempsey and Rocky LaRose at the time. And fortunately, I've been able to be here ever since. So I'm going on my 30th season, starting this fall, and it's been a good run, and I've really enjoyed living in Tucson and being part of the community and being part of the university, part of the athletic department. It's been an honor for me to be here for this long.
Yeah, and I've had the pleasure of working with you when I first got to Tucson, working with the women's volleyball program as a marketing lead, and enjoyed every year that I got to work with you and your staff. So I know you all are great folks and do great work. So what's your favorite thing about coaching at the University of Arizona?
Well, I think that getting the opportunity to work with young adults is especially at the age I am right now, I'm closer to retirement than I am to the first part of my career, the beginning part of my career, and I really now cherish every opportunity I get a chance to work with someone like you. I'm not sure how long you've been here now. How long have you been here now, Thomas? 5 years?
Almost five, yeah, almost 5
Okay, I
years.
was going to say, when you first got hired, a young pup coming right out of, I think that was at Louisville. Where were you? Louisville?
Western Kentucky.
Yeah, Western Kentucky, close to Louisville.
Yeah.
Anyway, and just the opportunity to work with young people and be as influential as I can and allowed to be. And I like the competition of being at this level in the conference. It certainly presents its challenges from year to year, but I like being at the very, as they say, the tip of the spear in terms of the level of sport. But more importantly for me is I just enjoy being around the young people that I recruit and have the opportunity to be in the gym with them and again try to be as influential as I can in their lives and hopefully be a good stepping stone to the next step in their life later on after college.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I think you and your coaching staff do a really good job of that. I just know whenever I had to work with your teams, they were always cooperative. They always had fun, and they just loved being in Tucson, and they loved being a part of your program. So kudos to you for that. And people see that, fans and staff members alike. So that's great to hear. So you've been in the game for a while. Always like to ask people, especially once you get to this point in your career, what would you tell your younger self?
I like this question because I think it requires a lot of introspection and a lot of reflection when you're at this point. And I think as an older coach, there are some regrets that you have in terms of how you behaved and some decisions you made when you first started out coaching. And I think when you're younger, you react and make decisions based on emotion. And rather than, it's good to sometimes to make decisions with your heart, but I think overall it's better to make decisions that are logical and reasonable and just using your brain and your head rather than the emotion that goes behind it. I think my coaching style back then was a lot different in regards to how I communicated with my players, I would be certainly a lot softer and a lot kinder now than I was then. Although, society was a lot different back in the early 90s, and what was tolerated back in the early 90s. Back then there was no internet and no cell phone, and student athletes didn't have the voice that they have right now. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It was just different. And so for me, it would be trust the process. I think when you're a young coach and trying to prove something, you coach probably more out of anger than you do out of love, and now it's definitely way more out of love than it is anger. I rarely get angry. I certainly get frustrated at times, but it's not out of maliciousness or out of anger, which I think when I was younger, it would be, probably lean more towards that. And so if I was to talk to someone, a new coach coming into the business, it would be trust the process. And the players now are so different in regards to willingness to learn, and they want to be a part of that process. They want a voice in that process now. We're back in the early 90s. It was much more dogmatic. We was much more, as coaches, more of a dictatorship than it was now, than it certainly is now. It's way more cooperative now. And you need to have the players, you have to have a good environment of communication. So that's what I would say. Just be patient, trust the process, be kinder and gentler than you were back when you first got started.
I like it. I think that's great advice. And so switching to kind of our APIDA focus. So now you obviously identify as someone from the APIDA culture. So just talk about what that means to you, like name what it is that, your ethnicity is and your background is, and what that means to you.
Well, my mom is Japanese, and my father is Filipino. So, and which is kind of in my generation, it was culturally a very different and a very difficult part of it, because when my mom and dad got together, the World War II wasn't that long ago. It was much more recent history back in the 50s than it is now, which, people don't look back on it, as often, and maybe some of the cultural challenges he had back in the 50s and the mid 50s when they got together. World War II was not even a decade old. And, there was some real bad blood between certainly the Filipinos and the Japanese. And even though, both of my grandparents immigrated here from those two countries, there was still some very strong cultural ties to the Philippines and from Japan. And so, when my parents got together, there was some bad blood, and I was really too young to understand any of that growing up. I don't think it had that much influence. My parents separated when I was very young, and it wasn't that I was estranged from my father, but I wasn't that close to him as I was growing up, although he did influence me on the volleyball end of it. But I probably identify more with my mom's side of the family, with the Japanese side of the family, than I do with my father's side. There's, my grandmother, who passed away back in the late 90s. My mom, who's now living with me, she's 84. And so, I grew up in a very white suburban, community, Northridge, California, which is just north of Los Angeles. And so I wasn't really surrounded by minorities, by Asians. In my high school, I bet you there was less than 12 total minorities, or probably more than that, of 3,600 people. That was 3,600 people in my high school. And that was just 3 grades. That was 10th, 11th, and 12th. And so, it was just not, and I never really looked at myself as a minority. No one ever treated me any differently. I was certainly part of the social groups that were, part of the athletes. And so I was really not ever exposed to anything from a racism standpoint. I would say it was pretty tame compared to what today is like back then. But, I was never exposed to anything other than maybe some pushing and shoving and, but, it was really nothing as big as what I've seen certainly lately.
Oh, thanks for sharing that unique experience. I appreciate that. And so, since I've been here, like I said, almost 5 years now, I've seen a nice amount of folks that you've recruited, from the APIDA culture, specifically the Pacific
Right.
Islander Samoan culture. I think about Panina Snuka and Kalei Mao, and then you even have, Emi Pua now, and those folks in my mind. What type of energy? What do those players normally bring? What do you find? If obviously they're not monolithic, but what is it about those types of players that you tend to see when you're recruiting them?
Well, certainly the Hawaiian Pacific, the Polynesians, what we call them, the Polys that we call them, they grew up in Hawaii with volleyball being their number one sport on the female side. And to a large extent, the male side as well. I mean, in Hawaii, paddling is maybe the number one sport, and then comes volleyball, and so it's a different culture there. Dave Soji, who was the head women's volleyball coach for 35, 40 years, created an environment where every young female wanted to play volleyball, grew up playing for the Waianis. And as a result, there's such a number of young ladies who, from the very beginning of almost before they were born, their DNA is wrapped around some type of volleyball. And so we like recruiting them because they're so passionate about the game. They've grown up with the game, and they're very well skilled. They have great aptitude for the game. And so, and there's a lot of really good volleyball players that come off the islands all the time. So we enjoy recruiting there, and I don't mind taking recruiting trips there either, as long as I bring my suntan lotion.
I bet. Yeah. Well, next time, let's see if I can get on a trip with you. How about that?
All right.
And so, throughout the month of May, with this interview included, the university as well as the athletics department is celebrating APIDA Heritage Month. Some folks call it AAPI Heritage Month. And the biggest way that the university celebrates this year is the creation of the APIDA Heritage logo. And so I always like to ask in these interviews if there's anything that sticks out about that logo that resonates with you or that you're really proud of.
I like the shape of the logo. I think the cat looks great. I think I've taken a look at the logo. I like the logo, and I like the words and what the words signify. For me, the one that stands out certainly is family. I have a young family, although they're getting older, obviously every single year. But back in the 90s and even to today within our athletics department, when we recruit young ladies, we talk about the family environment here and how important that is, and the things that you can expect when you come to Arizona. And you can rely on people from other sports, from the administration all the way down the training room, that they're going to treat you like family. They'll always be there for you. And so for me, that word stands out. A lot of other great words. Tradition is certainly part of that, and history and other things like that. But for me, family is the one that connects with me.
Yeah, I love that. That's been like the number one answer to that question when I ask folks. It's that family. It's probably one of the first things that was put on that logo, actually, in regards to words. Right now, we're going through a historic civil rights movement for our Asian folks in this country. Asian American folks have been facing a lot of violent attacks, a lot of blame for things that it has nothing to do with them. And right now, there's also a Stop Asian Hate movement going on, to kind of combat some of that stuff. So let me know your thoughts on everything that's going on surrounding the Asian American APIDA community.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, I kind of live my life through logic and reason. And a lot of the racism to me is not logical and is not reasonable. And so it's hard for me to grasp onto the, and wrap my arms around what's going on. It reminds me a lot of 9/11 and among the Muslim communities and what happened there, and they kind of lump everybody, whether you're Indian, and you're wearing a turban and so it's really an unfortunate set of circumstances, and people, I guess, in general, look for someone to blame for whatever the crisis is, and then they want to, and they're not picking on someone like me. They're picking on older people who can't defend themselves, which I think is so cowardly anyway. And so I'm disappointed in that I tend to look at things that these are such a small percentage of people in our society, and yet they get, they have the loudest voice and they get the most exposure, and yet because of the internet and because of the generation that we live in now, where it's almost instantaneous when something happens, it's immediately on YouTube or it's on social media. You'll see something happening immediately, and I think for me, it's just an unfortunate series of things that are happening right now in our community, whether it's with African American and the exposure that the police are getting. There's obviously some a lot of really good cops and a lot of good policemen out there. A very small percentage that are bad cops, and I think it's the same thing in our community. Is that there's a very small percentage of these people that are creating these situations and picking on the Asians. And yet they're getting it. It sounds like it's happening everywhere, and it's really that half our population are racist, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think it's a very small, less than 1% of our population, but those are the ones who are going out there and getting the most news, and it's unfortunate. It disappoints me in our community, but I think it's always there. I don't think that ever going to go away. I'm not. It's not that I'm not optimistic about that. I just think that there's always going to be that class of person who's going to grow up with that kind of hate in their heart, and you just can't get away from it. And, you just hope you can educate those people before they do some real harm.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's unfortunate. And, I know that's why we like to do things like this, to celebrate the cultures and the diversity within our department and on our university, so that it's not just the negative stuff that people see. We try to mix in some cool stuff and fun ways to celebrate each of these months, to let people know that we won't let that stuff affect us, and we're going to keep pushing and keep advocating for people. So I appreciate everything that you said. And as I say in all these interviews, our hearts are with the communities that are heavily affected at this moment, and we'll do our part to try to be a light for all people. But as you said, there's always going to be those folks out there that just raised by hate, and that's just who they are. But
right.
We'll keep pushing. And so I always like to end with a fun question. What is your favorite thing about working for Arizona Athletics?
Well, as I get close to retirement, I drive to work, and I appreciate driving to work. I appreciate walking in the doors of McHale, and I appreciate, coming in the office and having my assistants here and being able to talk and relate to them and establish friendships with them. I appreciate my administrators, and I get an opportunity to do a job that I love doing. I tell my kids, I said, my advice always to them is find a way to earn a living. That's something that you love to do. And I've been able and fortunate enough to be able to do that, and to do it here at University of Arizona, where the environment that they have created here is one that I enjoy coming to work with every single day. Has just been, an unbelievable ride, and so, uh, it's really, at the end of the day, it's the people that you're around. It's not the facilities, it's not the location. It's really the people who you're with. And I just enjoy coming to work and being with the people that are here.
That's awesome, and I share that with you. I had planned to be here for 2 years, and now I'm almost at 5. So I think that's a testament to the culture that we have and that we're building, continuously building. So yeah, well, thank you for your time, Dave. I really appreciate it. It's been a great interview, and I know our LinkedIn followers will definitely enjoy this and take a lot from it. So I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for doing it. And, it's the education part of it's always, a critical component to trying to change those hearts and minds of people, it's been a tumultuous year in a lot of different areas, just not COVID. But on the other hand, I also think it's been a great exposure. It's exposed a lot of things for us. And as a result of that, we're getting better and educating and moving forward, we're moving the needle. And so I think it's as difficult as it's been, I think there's a lot of things that happen out of difficulty, and I think this is one of them. You get better exposure and more educated.
I love that. That's a great way to end this interview. Appreciate the time, Dave.